moment now and imagine Jesus. You might see him teaching a great crowd of people. You might see him healing or welcoming little children. Perhaps you envision Jesus breaking bread or walking on water. The Gospels give us hundreds of moments in the life of Jesus, any one of which might bring us great comfort and peace. But today's reading is not one of them. It's a story, in fact, that we might prefer not even to know. The story comes right after some of the most memorable moments in Jesus' life. Feeding the 5,000, walking on water, healing the sick, teaching the scribes and Pharisees. And even though we might not like this story very much, it too has something of great importance to teach us. So listen now to these words from Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Part of me would prefer not even to know this story, wishes that it had never happened at all. This slur that Jesus uses, calling the woman and her daughter dogs, this resistance that Jesus shows, seems so out of character. It's not like the Jesus that we know. In fact, when this story comes around in the lectionary cycle, most pastors struggle with what to say. Some propose that Jesus was just testing her faith. Others suggest that this word dogs has softer connotations. But one of the rules that we learn in seminary about biblical interpretation is that the hardest reading is probably the right one. And after all, who are we to censor Jesus? So in reading this story, we have to take Jesus at his word. We have to wrestle with this text until we get a blessing. The setup for the story is that Jesus has traveled to the region of Tyre. So this is Gentile territory, a seaside town north of Galilee, just the kind of place that's right for a bit of vacation. Jesus is here in Tyre, looking for some rest and some blessed anonymity in a place where he expects no one to recognize him. But someone does, of course, and word gets out, and soon there's a woman knocking at the door begging Jesus to heal her little girl. Now Jesus is tired. And when people are really, really tired, two of the first things to go are patience and compassion. So here's this woman, a Gentile, who also carries the massive social stigma that her daughter is possessed by a demon. And she is one too many people needing his help. And she's interrupting his vacation. So Jesus says something he probably regretted later on. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Really? Really, Jesus? Jesus is supposed to be a healer, a friend of children, an exemplar of mercy. And he just called this woman and her little girl dogs? Tired or not, this is not what we expect from Jesus. In that moment, there were a lot of ways this woman could have responded. Her face might have burned hot with humiliation. She might have been too stunned to say anything at all. She could have turned to quickly leave. Or she might have fired back, "Don't call us dogs." But this woman takes a very different approach. She claims that slur. "Yeah, Jesus, we're dogs." And then she pushes back. And even the dogs under the table get the crumbs. Her words are like the classic move in some forms of martial arts, where your instinct says to step back from the aggressor, but instead you step toward them. Now you have to learn to do this because naturally we pull away when someone grabs us. Naturally, we step back and try to get out of range. But very often, the stronger move is actually to move toward your opponent. It puts you in a better position to defend yourself and counter-strike. Being close to Jesus here, being close to your opponent, is a stronger move. That's where the advantage lies. And so, in this moment, with this woman's words, she steps toward Jesus. Even the dogs under the table get the crumbs. She owns those words. She moves toward Jesus with them, and then she turns them around to her advantage. Because this mama is not going to let her baby live like this. She is determined to wrestle with Jesus until she gets her blessing. So she ends up being the only character in the Gospel of Mark who argues with Jesus and wins. She gets a blessing for her daughter and is healed. But the win is actually even bigger than that, because she's taught Jesus something about his ministry. She's shown him that God's grace is even greater than he imagined. It's like the moment in the Gospel of John when they're at the wedding. And Jesus' mom sees that the wine has run out, and she turns to Jesus and points it out. And he resists. He says, "Woman, my hour hasn't come. What's that to me?" But his mother is determined too. She tells the servants to get ready to do whatever he tells her because she is so convinced that he's going to do the right thing. And he gives in, does what his mama wants, and turns water into wine. In both stories, the wedding without wine and the little girl in need of healing, mothers come to Jesus, not on their own behalf, but on behalf of others, on behalf of the bride and groom, the family, the wedding guests, the little girl. And in both stories, Jesus' protest to them has to do with timing. To his own mother, he says, "My hour has not yet come." And to this mother in Tyre, he says, "Let the children be fed first." In both cases, the mothers insist that actually the time is now for the gift of grace. They understand that God's grace is bigger than we think. It's even bigger than Jesus thought. Because even he wasn't immune to the pull of prejudice. Even Jesus had to learn that God's grace isn't just for one group of people. It's not just for people who look like us and talk like us and live near us and think like us. God's grace is always crossing over the divisions that human beings set up. And this border-crossing grace calls us to relate to one another with mercy. This week, Evan Dawson, who is host of 1370 Connections, had a program on the theme of mercy. A recent study found that, encouragingly, most Christians still believe that mercy influences their daily behavior. More than 6 in 10 Christians say that mercy often influences their words and actions. But the other 4 out of 10 Christians are less likely to describe their words or actions as merciful. It may be part of their system of belief, but doesn't influence them on a daily basis. As Dawson and his panelists grappled with the topic of mercy and the reality that a sizable minority of Christians don't see mercy guiding their behavior, a man asked the panelists, "Who are you to judge me? Who are you to say I'm not doing enough?" While they quickly replied that they did not intend to judge him, they remained firm in challenging his resistance. Christian faith, they said, has always been countercultural. It doesn't just allow us to go along with the standards and values of the people around us. Christian faith doesn't let us limit ministry to certain groups of deserving people and call the others dogs. And in fact, when we do feel a challenge, when we do feel uncomfortable about what we are or aren't doing, that discomfort is probably the voice of God. God stepping closer and giving us a holy push, saying, "Who do you find it hard to treat with mercy? Who do you think of as less than, less deserving, less responsible, less important?" It's what this mother does to Jesus, stepping closer, wrestling for her blessing, teaching him the expansive nature of God's grace. As it turns out, I'm fiercely glad that the gospel writer had the courage to tell this story. I'm grateful that he didn't back down. I'm grateful that Mark stepped into the fray, showing us that even Jesus struggled with compassion fatigue, and that even Jesus found it hard to break the grip of prejudice. I'm glad that the gospel tells this story of a fierce mom who's not going to let Jesus push her away, who is not afraid to wrestle with him, and who won't let go of Jesus without her blessing, without his blessing. I'm most of all glad that we have a gospel that doesn't just bring us comfort. I'm glad we've got stories in this book that challenge us and change us, because that is, after all, what makes this the living and active Word of God. Amen.